Imagine catching the unmistakable scent of dried blood, not on your hands, but bleeding from the cold stones of your own parlor fireplace. In 1847, Nell Vance did. And what her husband had sealed behind that wall wasn't just a secret. It was a sin so heavy it would drag an entire town into darkness, and force her to choose between love and truth. The air in the east parlor tasted wrong. Not to the nose at first. To the soul. A faint metallic bite, like the ghost of old blood long turned to rust, settled at the back of Nell Vance's throat the moment she stepped across the threshold. It was 1847, late autumn, and Harwick Falls lay wrapped in the kind of New England chill that made every breath feel like a warning. The great stone fireplace loomed ahead of her, 11 feet of rough-hewn granite rising to the ceiling like a pagan altar someone had tried to civilize with a mantelpiece. Gas lamps hissed softly along the walls, their yellow light trembling across the crimson damask wallpaper as though the room itself were breathing. Nell paused, one gloved hand resting on the back of a velvet settee. The draft was there again. Not the honest draft of a chimney. This one came from behind the stones, cold and deliberate, carrying that coppery whisper straight into her lungs. She had smelled it before, on quiet evenings when Edmund was still at the mill, on nights when the wind should have been warm from the hearth but instead felt like fingers of ice sliding across her neck. She told herself it was nothing. Old houses have old smells. Old sins have longer memories. But tonight the feeling was stronger. Tonight it felt alive. Before we walk deeper into the shadows of Harwick Falls, let me paint the world Nell inhabited, because every secret needs its stage. The town sat in the verdant cradle of western Massachusetts like a jewel someone had dropped and forgotten to polish. The Harwick River cut through its heart, wide, restless, never sleeping. Its roar powered the colossal brick textile mill that dominated the eastern bank, a cathedral of industry whose water wheels turned day and night with a rhythmic groan that became the heartbeat of every soul who lived there. Steam rose in white plumes against the slate-gray sky. The smell of hot oil, wet cotton, and lye drifted on the wind like incense offered to the god of progress. Main Street was a dusty scar of ambition, clapboard shops, a white-steepled church whose bell Edmund himself had paid for, a blacksmith whose forge glowed like the mouth of hell after dark. Beyond the prosperous row stood the identical mill cottages, small, neat, identical as soldiers, where the workers lived and died by the whistle's call. And at the very top of the gentle rise, overlooking it all like a king on his throne, stood the Vance mansion. Federalist white-clapboard, dark green shutters, mahogany gleaming inside like polished conscience. Persian rugs swallowed footsteps. Beeswax and lavender fought for dominance against the ever-present ghost of Edmund's pipe tobacco. A house built on cotton, prayer, and something else no one spoke aloud. Edmund Vance was 41 that year, broad-shouldered, iron-jawed, the kind of man whose presence made other men straighten their spines. His wool coats were cut in Boston. His donations to the church and school were legendary. When he spoke at town meetings, voices hushed the way they did before a sermon. He had clawed prosperity from the river's back and wrapped the town in his vision of manifest destiny. People called him the father of Harwick Falls. Only Nell saw the shadow behind the smile. They had been married 2 years. A union of prominent families, celebrated with champagne and hymns. She had brought no fortune, only a quick mind and the kind of quiet beauty that made men look twice and then look away, ashamed of their thoughts. She ran the household with grace that masked exhaustion. She hosted dinners where mill contracts were signed between courses. She smiled while her husband's hand rested possessively on the small of her back. But at night, in the silence after the lamps were turned low, she felt the wall between them. Not anger. Distance. A polished, impenetrable distance. Her only true refuge was Clara Dyer, the town schoolteacher, 31, sharp-tongued, eyes bright behind wire spectacles. Clara read forbidden newspapers by candlelight and spoke of women's rights in whispers that felt like revolution. They took tea in the east parlor when Edmund was away, laughing until the walls seemed less heavy. Clara was the only soul who noticed when Nell's laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. And then there was the fireplace. Edmund had one unbreakable rule: nothing in the east parlor was ever to be moved. Not the settee. Not the rug. Not a single candlestick near that stone monolith. "It is perfect as it is," he had said the day they moved in, voice low and final. No argument allowed. Nell had obeyed. At first. But obedience has its limits when the house itself begins to speak. In the winter of 1848, a girl named Abigail Pratt had come to work in the Vance household. 17 years old, quiet as a church mouse, hands already rough from mill work. She scrubbed floors, carried ash, kept her eyes down. Her mother, Dorothy Pratt, lived in one of the tiny worker cottages, widowed and worn thin by grief and labor. Abigail lasted 4 months. Then, one October dawn, Edmund announced she had left for Boston. Better wages. A position with a respectable widow on Elm Street. He had even pressed a slip of paper into Dorothy's trembling hands, an address, a promise. Dorothy wrote letters every week for 3 years. News of the town. Prayers for her daughter. Hopes of a visit. Every single envelope came back stamped in brutal red ink, returned to sender. Address unknown. The town forgot Abigail quickly. Mill girls came and went like leaves on the river. But Dorothy never forgot. And Nell. Nell began to notice the silence the way one notices a missing tooth, always there, always aching. Now it was 1851. 4 years later. The metallic scent had grown bolder. On cold nights it crept out like fog, especially when the wind howled down the chimney. Nell found herself drawn to the parlor after Edmund retired. She would press her palm to the granite, feeling the unnatural chill radiate outward, as though the stones were breathing out the grave. One morning, while the housemaid dusted, Nell noticed something that stopped her heart. Beneath the edge of the heavy Persian rug, partially hidden, as though someone had tried to erase them, were faint semicircular scratches in the oak floorboards. Perfect arcs. Dozens of them. Old. Worn smooth by time. The kind of marks made when something massive is dragged across wood again and again, or when an entire fireplace pivots on a hidden mechanism. Nell's mouth went dry. Why would anyone move a fireplace? That same week she tested the waters. Casually, over breakfast, she mentioned redecorating the east parlor. Lighter wallpaper. Perhaps rearrange the furniture so the room didn't feel quite so oppressive. Edmund's reaction was immediate and terrifying. His fork clattered against the plate. His face flushed the color of raw liver. Eyes that had always been calm narrowed into slits. The east parlor is perfect as it is, Nell. His voice was low, almost a growl. I will not have you meddling. Some things are best left untouched. The fury in those words was disproportionate to wallpaper. It was the fury of a man guarding a tomb. Later that November, Clara came for tea. They retreated to the east parlor as always. A small fire crackled in the drawing room, yet the parlor felt colder than the grave. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. My goodness, Nell, it feels like a window's been left open in here. Or perhaps your grand fireplace is simply too grand to hold warmth. She laughed. Nell did not. Because she knew the cold came from inside the wall. Then came the whisper that changed everything. Thomas Aldridge was a quiet mill worker, 28, clever eyes that saw too much. He approached Nell outside the general store one gray afternoon, hat in hand, voice barely above the wind. Mrs. Vance. I feel I must tell you something. About Mr. Vance. Nell's pulse thundered. Late one night in October of 48, Thomas whispered, I was on the night shift. I saw Mr. Vance and Mr. Corbett carrying something heavy. Something wrapped in canvas. They brought it in through the side entrance near the east wing. Looked like they didn't want to be seen. He paused, eyes haunted. It was the same month Abigail Pratt supposedly left for Boston. The words landed like stones in still water. October 1848. The month Abigail vanished. The month something heavy was carried into the house, directly toward the east parlor. Nell's knees nearly buckled. That afternoon she walked to Dorothy Pratt's cottage. The little house smelled of wood smoke and poverty. Dorothy's face was etched with lines no woman her age should carry. After polite talk of weather and flower prices, Nell asked the question burning in her throat. Have you heard from Abigail? Dorothy's eyes filled instantly. She shuffled to a battered tin box and opened it. Dozens of letters. Yellowed. Brittle. Everyone addressed to Miss Abigail Pratt, care of Mrs. Eleanor Finch, 14, Elm Street, Boston. Everyone stamped, return to sender. Address unknown. Edmund gave me that address himself, Dorothy whispered, voice cracking like thin ice. He said she was happy there. Nell stared at the stack of unanswered prayers. Her husband had lied. That night, sleep refused her. Nell sat at her writing desk, gas lamp casting a lonely circle of light. Her hand trembled as she opened a new journal, leather-bound, blank pages waiting like an accusation. She wrote. October 27, 1851. The air in this house has turned against me. I can no longer pretend the cold draft from the east parlor fireplace is ordinary, nor the metallic scent that clings to its stones like a confession. The scratches beneath the rug speak of something moved in secret, something massive, something hidden. Edmund's rage when I mentioned redecorating. Thomas Aldridge's trembling confession. Dorothy's returned letters. All of it points to one monstrous truth. My husband knows what is behind that wall. And I fear, with a dread that feels biblical in its weight, that Abigail Pratt is there too. The thought is unspeakable. Yet it will not leave me. It whispers like the blood of Abel crying from the ground. I must know. God help me. I must know. Nell closed the journal, but the words burned behind her eyes. Outside, the mill kept turning. The river kept rushing. The town slept under its blanket of prosperity. But in the Vance mansion, something ancient and hungry had begun to stir behind 11 feet of granite. And Nell Vance, quiet, observant, once faithful wife, was about to tear the veil away. She did not yet understand that some doors, once opened, do not close again until divine justice has had its say. And in Harwick Falls, justice was long overdue. The fear had changed shape. At first it was sharp, like a shard of glass lodged in the throat, the terror of discovery, of losing the life she had so carefully arranged around herself, silk dresses, polite dinners, the quiet respect of being Mrs. Edmund Vance. Now it was heavier. Deeper. A slow, suffocating certainty that silence was no longer safety. Silence was complicity. Silence was the grave she might already be sharing with a girl whose name no one spoke anymore. Harwick Falls in the early 1850s wore its prosperity like fine wool, beautiful from a distance, itchy close up. The mill never slept. The river never rested. And the powerful men of the town, Edmund foremost among them, moved through their days with the calm of men who believe their secrets are heavier than God's judgment. Nell no longer believed that. She had become a hunter in her own house. Outwardly nothing changed. She still poured tea with steady hands, still greeted guests with the same gentle smile, still wore the lavender water Edmund once said reminded him of innocence. But inside, every gesture was calculated. Every conversation a probe. Every night a vigil. Her first quiet alliance was with Reverend Gideon Holt. 60 years old, silver-haired, eyes soft behind small round spectacles, he kept the town's memory in leather-bound ledgers and yellowed parchment. His study behind the white-steepled church smelled of old paper, candle wax, and the faint sweetness of decaying oak. Nell arrived one gray Tuesday with a basket of shortbread and a fabricated story. She wished to trace the founding families for a keepsake album she planned to gift Edmund on their anniversary. The Reverend, flattered, opened his archives like a man opening his heart. They traced deeds, baptisms, marriages. On the third visit, he unrolled a map of the Vance estate dated 1847, the year before Abigail vanished, the year Edmund had married Nell and brought her into this house of polished lies. There, inked in careful clerks. Hand, structural modification to east wing. New hearth and chimney flue. Contractor, Peter Goff. Nell's pulse stuttered. Goff, Reverend Holt murmured, tapping the page. Fine mason. Came through town for that one job. Built the great stone fireplace you have now. Left shortly after. Never heard tell of him again. The fireplace wasn't original. It had been built in 1847. The same year Edmund had chosen that exact spot to place a monument of stone in secrecy. That evening Nell met Clara in the shadowed corner of the east parlor. The fire was low, the draft stronger than ever. Clara listened without interruption as Nell laid out the map, the deed, the timeline. When she finished, Clara removed her spectacles and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "So the fireplace isn't ancient," she said quietly. "It's a cover." Nell nodded. "Built over something. Or someone." They spent the next months traveling to the county seat, two respectable women in bonnets and shawls, poring over dusty architectural plans under the indifferent gaze of a board clerk. And there it was. The original plans of the Vance house, 1810. A modest exterior door on the east wall, leading down into a small storage cellar carved into the hillside. The 1847 modification plan showed the door bricked shut. Then the new hearth and chimney constructed directly in front of it. The fireplace hadn't been built to warm a room. It had been built to entomb one. In the spring of 1853, Thomas Aldrich vanished. The same Thomas who had whispered to Nell about the heavy, canvas-wrapped burden carried into the East Wing in October 1848. Deputy Wallace, loyal to Edmund since boyhood, filed the report with mechanical indifference, left of his own accord, seeking work elsewhere. Thomas's mother came to Nell in tears, clutching a worn shawl. "He wouldn't leave without a word, Mrs. Vance. Not my boy. He always wrote. Every week." Nell held the woman's trembling hands and felt the echo of Dorothy Pratt's grief. Two people now. Two voices silenced for seeing too much. Nell wrote to Boston, not to the false address Edmund had given Dorothy, but to the city registry office. A formal inquiry. A description of Abigail, 17 in 1848, dark brown hair, hazel eyes, small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. 3 months crawled by. The reply arrived on a sleet-lashed March morning. No record. No trace. Abigail Pratt had never set foot inside Boston city limits between 1848 and the present day. She had never left Harwick Falls. Hiram Corbett began to unravel. Edmund's business partner, once as rigid and reliable as the mill's iron gears, now stank of whiskey by noon. His wife Agnes, a nervous woman with darting eyes, cornered Clara after church one Sunday. "He talks in his sleep," Agnes whispered, twisting her handkerchief. Over and over. "Some things are better left sealed. He wakes up sweating, crying out. What does he mean, Clara? What is he so afraid of?" Clara relayed the words to Nell without embellishment. Sealed. The exact word for a door bricked shut, bolted from the outside, hidden behind 11 feet of granite. One night in 1855, Edmund drank himself into a stupor after a long mill dispute. Nell waited until his snores rattled the upstairs hall. She moved like a ghost to his study. The mahogany desk was locked, always locked. But Nell had watched him for years. She knew the precise tension of the mechanism. She knew which of her own hairpins had the perfect curve. Her hands did not shake. The drawer opened with a soft, guilty click. Among ledgers and letters lay a single receipt. Boston Ironmonger. November 1848. 2 dozen iron bolts. 3 heavy iron hinges. Quick setting mortar. Delivered to Vance residence, Harwick Falls. November 1848. Weeks after Abigail disappeared. Weeks after the fireplace was finished. Not materials for decoration. Materials for imprisonment. A door that could be locked from the outside. A door that could become a tomb. Nell closed the drawer. Sat in the dark. Felt the house breathe around her. She had slept beside this man for 8 years. Walked past that wall every day. While a girl, perhaps still breathing in those first terrible weeks, had been sealed behind it. Her journal became a lifeline. March 12, 1855. I have held the receipt in my hands. Iron bolts. Hinges. Mortar meant to set forever. He did not build a fireplace. He built a grave. Abigail never reached Boston. Thomas Aldridge never left this valley. The silence of Harwick Falls is not peace. It is conspiracy. I feel her sometimes. Not a ghost. A pressure. A cold that lives in the mortar lines. A scratching in the night that is not wind. I am afraid. But I am more afraid of what I become if I stay silent. The nights grew unbearable. She would lie rigid beside Edmund, listening to the house groan. Every creak became a footstep. Every sigh of wind became a muffled cry. She rose barefoot, walked the darkened corridors, stood before the fireplace. Pressed her ear to the stone. The draft never stopped. Sometimes, only sometimes, she thought she heard something else. A faint scrape. Not claws. Not wind. Despair-given sound. She told herself it was madness. The cold told her otherwise. It was the cold of extinction. Of air that had long forgotten how to carry life. Her body began to betray her. Sleeplessness carved hollows beneath her eyes. Food tasted of ash. In the mirror she saw a stranger pale, haunted, lit from within by something fierce and final. She had married a man capable of building a tomb in his own parlor. And the town had helped him keep it shut. In 1856 she tested Edmund directly. A quiet dinner. Candlelight. Brandy loosening his guard. Edmund, she said softly, I spoke with Dorothy Pratt again. She still grieves Abigail. Isn't it strange the girl never wrote? Don't you ever wonder what really happened to her? His spoon paused halfway to his mouth. Then the smile, smooth, practiced, perfect. You know how young girls are, my dear. They reach the city, find new lives. They forget where they came from. It happens every day. His voice was velvet. But his eyes flickered. Just once. A flash of something raw, fear, perhaps, or the ghost of guilt, before the mask slipped back into place. Nell stored the flicker like evidence. Later that year Judge Elias Fenn came to dinner. Old friend of Edmund's. Circuit judge. Portly, loud, shrewd. Nell, emboldened by cherry cordial, raised the subject again. I'd been thinking of freshening the east parlor. A lighter mantle. Perhaps a smaller, more modern hearth. The old one feels oppressive. She watched. Edmund and the judge exchanged a glance. Brief. Almost invisible. But unmistakable. A silent telegram, she's getting close. Handle it. The warning came next from Deputy Wallace or himself. He stopped her on Main Street, hat in hand, smile fixed like a mask. Friendly word, Mrs. Vance. Harwick Falls is a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way. His eyes were flat. Cold. A lady who asks too many questions, especially about her husband's affairs, can find herself in uncomfortable circumstances. For your own good, stick to more suitable matters. The threat was velvet-wrapped steel. Nell walked home with ice in her veins. It wasn't just Edmund. It was the judge. The deputy. The reverend who looked away. The town itself, its powerful men, had formed a circle around the secret. Clara confirmed it. Edmund had summoned her to his study. Offered tea. Then, in fatherly tones. Nell has been preoccupied lately. It might be best, for both of you, if you kept a little distance. Clara had laughed in his face and told Nell everything. He thinks he can command friendships, Clara said, cheeks burning. He's afraid of you. Of us. Nell understood then. This was no longer a marriage hiding a crime. This was a conspiracy wearing the skin of a town. One night in 1858 Edmund was away, mill business in Springfield. The house lay silent except for the grandfather clock's merciless heartbeat. Nell entered the east parlor alone. No lamp. Only moonlight slicing through the drapes. She knelt before the fireplace. Pressed her palms to the granite. The cold was vicious. Biblical. The cold of a sealed judgment. She ran her fingers along the mortar lines, feeling for anything, a seam, a weakness, a lie in the stone. Her breath came in shallow bursts. And then she heard it. Faint. So faint she thought her mind had conjured it. A single, deliberate scratch. Not from inside the wall. From beneath it. From below. From the place where the old door had once led downward. Nell froze. The draft rose stronger, carrying that copper tang, old blood, old fear, old silence. She did not scream. She simply stood. And in that moment, something unbreakable hardened inside her. She would not stop. Not until the stones spoke. Not until the tomb opened. Not until justice, human or divine, finally answered the cry that had waited 10 long years behind the wall. Because some blood cries from the ground. And Harwick Falls had ignored it long enough. The chisel had become part of her hand. Night after night, in the dead hours when even the mill's distant groan fell silent, Nell knelt before the great stone fireplace like a penitent at an altar of lies. The tool, once meant for delicate embroidery, now bore the scars of her obsession: nicks in the blade, gray mortar dust ground into the wooden handle, her own blood dried in thin brown lines along the edge. She worked the lowest rectangular block, the one nearest the hearth where the granite met oak. Each session lasted until her shoulders burned and her fingers cramped into claws. She chipped at the mortar in hairline increments, never enough to wake Edmund, never enough to leave obvious debris. The dust she swept into her apron pocket and carried downstairs to scatter in the garden under cover of darkness. The smell grew bolder with every fraction she opened. Not just old stone anymore. Something wetter. Something that had once been alive. In the spring of 1857, Hiram Corbett collapsed at the mill. Heart failure, the doctor said. A clean, respectable end for a man who had spent his last years drowning in whiskey and guilt. Agnes Corbett, widowed, finally free of the husband who had muttered terrors in his sleep, sought Clara out behind the church after the funeral. Her voice was a raw whisper. In his final days he kept repeating it. Over and over. We should have opened it in 49. We should have opened it when there was still time. Clara relayed the words to Nell that same evening. The year after Abigail vanished. The year after the fireplace rose like a monument to silence. Nell's journal had become less a record and more a confession of her own unraveling. July 19, 1857. Hiram is dead, and with him perhaps the last chance for confession. But his dying words opened it in 49. They knew she was alive then. They knew, and chose to leave her sealed. The stone at the base is nearly free. My fingers bleed through the bandages I wrap each morning. The pain is nothing compared to the certainty growing inside me. If I am wrong, they will call me mad. Hysterical. A wife broken by fancy. If I am right, the man I married is a murderer who built his own hell beneath our feet. And the town that profited from his theft helped him lock the door. A faint thread of light arrived unexpectedly. A traveling circuit preacher, passing through Harwick Falls, shared a story with Reverend Holt over supper at the parsonage. In Providence, years earlier, he had counseled a mason tormented by a job he had taken in western Massachusetts. The man spoke of building a false wall over a door, sealing something he could never quite forget. The mason's name was Peter Goff. Reverend Holt, remembering the 1847 deed, quietly traced the man through church networks. A week later he pressed a folded slip of paper into Nell's hand, an address in Providence. Nell wrote the letter that night. Careful. Measured. Hinting at injustice buried beneath stone, asking only for memory and truth. She waited. Months passed like slow poison. One moonless night in late 1858, Edmund away again, Nell returned to the parlor alone. The single candle she carried threw grotesque shadows across the crimson damask. She knelt. Probed the loosened block. It gave. With a final, trembling heave she pulled the stone free. It thudded softly onto the rug. A narrow black slit stared back at her. The draft that rushed out was alive, cold, wet, carrying the unmistakable stench of confinement. Damp earth. Rot. And beneath it all, the faint, sweet rot of something once human. Nell did not scream. She simply stared into the void, feeling the house exhale around her. Then, in the summer of 1859, the envelope arrived. Thick. Providence postmark. Nell's hands shook so badly Clara had to steady the paper as she tore it open. 4 pages. Precise handwriting. A confession 11 years in the making. Providence, Rhode Island. August 14, 1859. Dear Madam, your letter has pierced a conscience that has known no rest since the autumn of 1848. I was the mason hired by Mr. Edmund Vance. My task, to convert a portion of the existing basement wine cellar into a smaller, secure chamber. To brick over the old exterior door that once opened into the east parlor. To erect a grand but false fireplace directly in front of the sealed entrance, its flue narrowed, its hearth shallow, never meant for fire. Mr. Vance provided sketches, enclosed. He spoke of valuable documents requiring protection. He insisted on a narrow ventilation shaft running up through the new chimney, barely wide enough for a fist, to preserve papers from damp. I installed a heavy iron door on the cellar side of the new interior wall. 24 iron bolts, driven from the outside. 3 massive hinges. Quick-setting mortar to seal the frame forever. When the last bolt slid home, when the mortar hardened, I stood in the dim cellar light and listened. I tell myself I heard nothing. But the silence was wrong. Thick. Full. I left Harwick Falls soon after. The memory has followed me like a shadow. Your words have dragged it into the light. May God forgive my hands for the stones they laid. Enclosed, the original sketches and my notes. Yours in troubled conscience. Peter Goff. Nell read it aloud to Clara and Reverend Holt in the parsonage study. The sketches, faded but exact, matched every horrifying detail: the narrowed flue, the ventilation shaft, the iron door bolted from outside. It was never storage. It was a cell. That night, Edmund in Boston on mill business, 3 figures gathered in the east parlor under a single candle. Nell, Clara, Reverend Holt. Nell had already loosened 3 more stones over months of secret labor. The aperture gaped wider now, a wound in the granite. Clara held the candle, its flame jerked wildly. Reverend Holt clutched his small leather Bible, lips moving in silent prayer. Are you ready? Clara whispered. Nell's jaw tightened. I have been ready for years. They worked in near silence. Chisel on stone. Mortar crumbling like dry sin. Dust coating their hands, their faces. The copper stench thickened until it coated the tongue. Hours bled away. Finally the false facade gave way. Behind it, the iron door. Rusted bolts, 24 driven deep into the frame. Exactly as Goff described. Reverend Holt breathed, my God. Nell's raw fingers closed on the first bolt. It resisted, then turned with a shriek of metal. One by one. The groan of hinges long unused filled the room like a dying breath. The door swung inward. Clara lifted the candle. The light revealed a space no larger than a modest pantry, 9 feet by 7. Carved from the old cellar. A rotted mattress sagged in one corner, threads and rusted springs. A tin cup, green with verdigris. A leather Bible, pages pulp and illegible. Hundreds of tally marks scratched into the stone wall. Days counted in fury. And below them, etched over and over in desperate strokes. Abigail. 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 Then, in careful letters beneath the name. She was alive in here. Someone knew. Someone brought food. The room was empty. No body. No skeleton. No final remains. Only questions sharper than any blade. If she had lived long enough to scratch messages, to count years, then someone had fed her. Opened the door. Closed it again. Someone had kept her breathing in the dark. Nell dropped to her knees. Searched by candlelight. Beneath a loose floorstone near the back wall, a folded paper. Brittle. Preserved. Abigail's handwriting matched against the letters Dorothy had kept. October 17, 1848. I write this in darkness with charcoal I found, praying someone finds it. I saw Mr. Vance and Mr. Corbett in the study late at night. Forging signatures. Altering deeds. Stealing land from mill workers, from families who have nothing else. Small plots. Inheritances. All taken through lies on paper. I confronted Mr. Vance. Told him I would not stay silent. While they robbed the poor. He smiled. Cold. Said he would handle it quietly. He brought me to the cellar under pretense of a task. He locked the door. I heard masons above. Heard stone laid. Heard the fireplace built over the entrance. I am trapped. Cold. Afraid. But I will not be silent. I will not let them win. May God help me. Abigail Pratt. Nell's voice broke on the final line. Fraud. Land theft on a scale that had enriched the mill, the town, the men who ran both. Abigail had seen it. And for that, Edmund had built her a grave while she still breathed. But someone had kept her alive. In a crack near the scratch name, Nell's fingers closed on something small and cold. A small iron key. She held it to the candlelight. It fit no lock she knew. Yet. The room exhaled around them, stagnant, accusing. Abigail had not died here. She had been moved. And someone still walked free with the truth. Nell rose slowly, the key clenched in her bleeding palm. The fireplace had been torn open. But the real darkness, the one that fed a prisoner for years and then spirited her away, was still wearing a human face. And Harwick Falls had never stopped protecting it. The key lay cold in Nell's palm. Crude. Hand-forged. Clearly made in haste and desperation. But it fit the bolts on the iron door, proof that someone had opened it from the outside. Not once. Many times. Scratched beside Abigail's frantic tallies, in smaller, steadier letters almost lost in the shadows of the stone. T.A. Thomas Aldridge. The mill worker who had whispered to Nell in 1853. The man who had seen Edmund and Hiram carrying something heavy into the East Wing in October 1848. The man who had vanished the same spring Abigail supposedly left for Boston. He had known. He had fed her. He had fashioned a key from whatever scraps he could steal. And in the spring of 1853, during one of Edmund's long absences, he had slid back those rusted bolts, pulled open the door, and carried her out into the night. They had fled together. They were both alive. The realization struck Nell like cold water after fever. Abigail might still breathe. Thomas might still walk under open sky. And Edmund. Edmund had known all along. For 6 years he had worn his mask of respectability while two fugitives lived beyond his reach, while the town mourned ghosts that were never dead. Nell, Clara, and Reverend Holt worked in frantic silence to reseal the opening. Stones replaced. Mortar dusted over. Rugs smoothed. The room behind the wall was hidden again, but its truth was no longer sealed. Reverend Holt returned to his study that same night. No local sheriff. No Judge Fenn. He addressed his letter directly to the circuit court in Springfield, state level, beyond the reach of Harwick Falls' tangled loyalties. Enclosed, Peter Goff's confession and sketches. Abigail's charcoal testimony. A precise inventory of the room's contents. Descriptions of the fraudulent deeds, the disappearances, the complicity. 3 days later Edmund returned from Boston. He stepped into the east parlor. His eyes flicked immediately to the fireplace. To the faint disturbance in the mortar lines. To the whisper of dust on the rug. Nell stood at the window, back straight, hands clasped before her. Nell, he said, voice velvet over iron. It seems you've been industrious in my absence. She turned. No tremor. No tears. Only a gaze as steady as Winterstone. I have uncovered the truth, Edmund. His face remained calm. But in her journal that night she wrote, his eyes were those of a man who has already weighed every possible outcome and found them all tolerable. A predator who believes the trap has not yet sprung. The conversation that followed was a duel without raised voices. The truth? Edmund echoed, a faint smile curling. And what truth is that? That you've defiled my home with your delusions? That a flighty girl ran off to the city? That a worker sought better wages? The fireplace is a fireplace, Nell. Nothing more. I know about the room, she said. The iron door. The bolts from the outside. Abigail's confession. The tallies. The message, she was alive in here. Someone knew. Someone brought food. I know about the land you stole. The deeds you forged. I know Thomas Aldridge fed her. And I know they escaped. Edmund stepped closer. You will say nothing of this. For the good of our family. For the good of Harwick Falls. Nell's laugh was soft, bitter. For the good of Edmund Vance. You will regret this, he whispered. Perhaps. But I will not live inside your lie any longer. The silence between them was louder than any shout. Reverend Holt's letter reached Springfield. Judge Finn tried to smother the inquiry, old friendships, quiet favors. But the Reverend had been careful. The package went straight to the state attorney's desk. The investigation could not be buried. In spring 1861, Deputy Wallace resigned without a word. The town whispered, no one spoke aloud. Edmund Vance was indicted, unlawful imprisonment, fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice. The trial opened in Springfield, September 1861. Spectators filled the gallery. Newspapers from Boston sent correspondent. Nell testified, Portland. We married. We lived in fear of discovery. I stayed silent because I knew his power. A mill girl's word against his. But now the walls have spoken. My confession. My tallies. My name on the stone. I am alive. I will come to Springfield and testify. Justice has waited long enough. Sincerely, Abigail Aldridge, née Pratt. The gallery erupted. Abigail arrived 2 days later. 30 years old. Scarred by hardship. Unbroken. She walked to the stand. Edmund's composure cracked, eyes wide, face draining of color. The predator saw the prey he had buried rise. She spoke quietly. Clearly. The confrontation. The cellar. The clang of the door. Masons overhead sealing her in. Years of darkness. Thomas's deliveries. Their escape in a supply wagon under night. Cross-examination faltered. You claim imprisonment, yet you live. I live because Thomas Aldridge had courage Mr. Vance never possessed. He left me to die slowly. Thomas gave me life. The jury deliberated 2 hours. Guilty. All counts. Sentence, 14 years in Charlestown State Prison. Judge Finn was removed from the bench. His name quietly erased from records. Thomas Aldridge returned once to Harwick Falls for a quiet ceremony in the church. Reverend Holt thanked him publicly. Thomas only nodded, eyes finding Nell across the pews. He and Abigail returned to Portland. To the life they had fought for. The stolen lands were restored. Corbett's estate liquidated. Proceeds went to the workers who had lost everything. The Vance house sold. The new owners sealed the east parlor forever. No one lit a fire there again. Nell left Harwick Falls in 1863. She settled in Northampton. A modest boarding house. Clean air. no metallic tang on the wind. She published her journal under a pseudonym, The East Wall, a true account, a woman of Harwick Falls. Distributed quietly through churches. A small book that became a quiet fire. In autumn 1863 she stood at her window. Crisp leaves. Distant woods. Air that carried only the scent of earth and change. For the first time in 16 years she breathed without the weight of stone above her. The hidden room had not just changed Harwick Falls. It had exposed the greater architecture, how silence builds walls stronger than granite. How complicity lets monsters walk freely among us. How one woman's refusal to stay quiet and one man's quiet courage can tear them down. The most terrifying prisons are not made of iron and stone. They are made of the things good people refuse to see. And sometimes, after years in the dark, the truth steps into the light, alive, unbroken, and ready to testify.